All right, we are going to be reading a story today all about an oak tree. And we're going to see that an oak tree has a life cycle. What do you picture when you think about the life cycle of an oak tree? What do you picture? What do you picture at the beginning of its life? What do you visualize? Do you visualize maybe that acorn starting to grow? And how about as the tree is growing? What happens to the tree as it's growing? Then think about the end of an oak tree's life. What happens as that oak tree is dying? What would it look like? How big would it be? Thinking about all of those things helps us kind of wrap our brain around what we're going to be reading. Would this be a fiction or a nonfiction book? Did you say that it would be a nonfiction book? You're right. What made you think that? Well, I think it's a nonfiction book, probably because of the real pictures and knowing that life cycles are real things. So I know that the author's purpose was to inform me or teach me about the life cycle of the oak tree. Here are some pictures to get us thinking about the life cycle. First, I see seeds. Next, I see some young leaves. Then I see some great big pumpkins. And then above the table of contents, I have a large oak tree. Off to the side, I see pictures of acorns. Then there's an acorn that's got some white stuff growing out of it. And then a tiny, tiny little tree. And I have an introduction, 3 chapters, and a conclusion, followed by the glossary and index. Words to think about. Life cycle. An oak tree changes and grows during its life cycle. Plants. Many types of plants live on Earth. Roots. Roots usually grow under the ground. Seeds. Most plants begin as seeds. Stems. Stems bring water and nutrients to plants. Trunk. A tree has a trunk. Now, I believe this text is in one of your benchmark booklets. If you would like to follow along in your paper copy or have that ready for some of the future activities, pause me now and get that out. Here we go, the introduction. All plants have a life cycle or an order in which they change and grow. Here we see the life cycle of an apple tree. We did that in science, didn't we? During the life cycle, a plant grows the parts it needs to stay alive and make new plants. And here we see the life cycle of a tomato plant. At the bottom, I see an acorn and then a sprout and a tree. Let's read. Oak trees have a life cycle. Fully grown oak trees can make new oak trees. And that's what a life cycle is all about, is living things and making more living things. Chapter 1, A New Oak Tree Begins. Now, this heading or this title of Chapter 1 says a new oak tree begins. So I think I'm talking about the beginning of the oak tree life. At first, a fully grown oak tree drops seeds. These seeds are acorns. Animals will eat most of the acorns, but a few will become new oak trees. I see the word seeds is in bold print, and the author is drawing my attention to that word. It's an important word to know, and it is important to the beginning of the new oak tree. Captions are also really important. You never want to skip over reading those. Here we have 2 captions written in blue. This acorn fell from an oak tree. This squirrel found an acorn on the ground. Chapter 2. Oh, I was going to just see if I skipped a page there accidentally. Nope, we're good. Chapter 2. A new oak tree grows. A few months after the acorn falls, roots begin to grow. The roots grow into the ground. Look at that. There's some dark black soil. The roots are quite white, aren't they? Next, a stem grows from the acorn. Leaves grow from the stem during the first year. Now the oak tree is a sapling. So I see roots and stem are in bold print. The title is How a New Oak Tree Grows, and this is how it starts growing, isn't it? Look at the labels on the pictures. That shows me exactly where the roots, stem, and leaves are. Plant fact, an oak tree is a seedling before it is a sapling. Ooh, that's good to know. They use that time order word, so I know a seedling comes first and then a sapling. Blue captions. Roots grow if the acorn stays moist and cool. You know what? It didn't tell me that in the regular text, did it? Now I know that if it doesn't have moist and cool environment, the roots can't grow. Next caption. This sapling has just a few leaves. Slowly the oak tree becomes larger. At last, the stem becomes a thick, strong trunk. Flowers grow on the oak tree, and then the flowers become acorns. What will happen to these acorns? Do you think they'll be eaten? Do you think they'll drop to the ground? Now, here's something I didn't know. Did you know that oak trees have flowers? I know that the pollen in the springtime really gets some of the allergies going for a few of you. So acorn pollen, or the oak tree flower pollen that will eventually become the acorns, that could be part of our problem. It says sequence of events. This book shows a sequence or order of events. Find the words at last. Do you see them at the top of the first column? These words help you understand the sequence. What other words in this book help you understand the sequence? And when you reread this story on your own, you can certainly go looking for those. We'll see if we can find a few more sequence words as we read. Chapter 3, An Old Oak Tree Dies. This must be the end of a life cycle, don't you think? After dropping acorns for many years, oh my goodness, there's some sequencing words after for many years. After dropping acorns for many years, the oak tree finally dies. Finally is usually one of our ending sequence words, isn't it? An oak tree can live for hundreds of years. Can you see oak trees where you live? Captions in blue. Finally, the oak tree dies. Under the big picture, this oak tree is about 1,500 years old. This new oak tree grows in a forest. Imagine a tiny little sapling becoming a huge oak tree. Conclusion. Now remember, a conclusion wraps up our story and it often repeats the introduction. An oak tree is a plant that changes and grows. An oak tree has a life cycle. Now here's a pretty simple life cycle. It starts with acorn. The acorn grows roots. The roots and from the acorn grow stems and leaves. And then we have an oak tree that drops more acorns, and it just keeps going around and around in circles. That's why it's a life cycle that goes in a big circle. It's a lot like a timeline, but a timeline often begins with one thing when it is born or when it starts till it ends or dies. But here we have a life cycle, and it's a cycle because the mature oak tree in this case, but the mature living thing makes more of itself. And in this situation, the oak tree makes more of itself by making acorns that can grow into a tree. Here we have a glossary, and those words that we saw in bold print, those important words, are here. Life cycle, plants, roots, seeds, stems, trunk. They give us the definition or the meaning of each word. They show us where the word is found. And then at the bottom we have an index. And remember, an index is listed in alphabetical order, and it'll tell you where to find the topic in the story. So for instance, if you wanted to find out more about acorns, you could look at page 6 or page 11. If you wanted to know more about the trunk of a tree, it tells us we could turn to page 10. So this is our story. An oak tree has a life cycle, and you can do a rereading if you would like with the passage that is in your binder, in that benchmark booklet.